monkey?
Ever since I've been a kid, I've been fascinated with monster movies. Turning on the TV late at night and finding a Godzilla movie with him fighting all kinds of monsters in cheap rubber suits was an absolute treat. I was so into Godzilla and monster movies in general that I played the hell out of every Godzilla game that I could find. I was 12 years old when the American Godzilla remake came out, and as much as people say it's bad now, we all liked it when we were kids. I bought all the toys, I watched the animated series, and growing up, I didn't really know any other kids that were into these big monster movies like I was. You might be wondering, why is he talking about Godzilla so much during a King Kong review? Well, the worlds were always one and the same to me. I was originally exposed to King Kong by the Universal Studios Florida Kongfrontation ride, which I fell in love with, but sadly it closed in 2002. So you can imagine my excitement when I found out there existed a King Kong vs. Godzilla movie. And now we're doing it again. It seems that now everybody is trying to set up their own little movie universe, following the template that Marvel perfected. DC's trying to play catch up with their movies, Universal is doing it with their monsters, starting with The Mummy, and now the kaiju monsters are being united on screen. And that's where Kong Skull Island comes in. Similar to how Iron Man 2 existed to set up all the little strings that connects everything together in the Avengers, Kong Skull Island exists to set up all the connections that bring Kong into the Godzilla universe. It started with 2014's Godzilla, and Kong Skull Island is the second movie in this monsterverse. We're getting a sequel to Godzilla called Godzilla King of the Monsters in 2019, and King Kong vs. Godzilla in 2020, where the two titans are going to face off. But aside from being a setup for future movies, it's also important that Skull Island can stand as its own movie. If you were to take out all the different connections to the Godzilla universe that Kong has, this movie still makes perfect sense and it has its own personality. During this review, I'm going to go over some of the story points, and we're definitely going to talk about that after credits scene, so there may be some spoilers. The first thing you'll probably want to do while sitting in that theater watching Kong is to compare it to the original movie, which has always been considered a masterpiece. But this movie was never meant to be compared to the original. We already had Peter Jackson's 2005 remake for that. Whereas the original story can be seen as an interpretation of the Beauty and the Beast story, Kong Skull Island has its own identity. It does have some resemblances to the original, like the native tribe that lives on Skull Island and that giant wall that they had built to keep the monsters out. But those are really the only things that are directly taken from the old movie, other than the fact that there's giant monsters living on Skull Island. This movie serves as a straight-up, action-packed monster movie, and it doesn't try to be anything more than that. The plot is basic, and it's right out of a B-movie. And that's perfectly fine. I think it's great seeing the story of Kong told to us in a different way, other than the way it's been presented to us time and time again through popular culture. There's no aspiring director trying to make a movie, there's no love story between the woman and Kong, and it's a complete different time period taking place right after the Vietnam War, a couple of decades before Godzilla. There's a scientific organization called Monarch that appears in both of these movies and that investigates sightings of these monsters, and they tie together this universe just like how S.H.I.E.L.D. was the rope tying all the Marvel movies together. And John Goodman plays a scientist obsessed with proving that monsters exist after an experience he had in his younger days. So he gets the government to provide a military unit to escort him to Skull Island, where he thinks huge discoveries could be made. And when they find Skull Island, it's clearly a terrible idea. This island is surrounded by this horrible thunderstorm that never goes away. At what point do you say, maybe we should turn around? But no, they punch right through those clouds, and go into the island. And the very first thing they do when they get there is to start dropping bombs, trying to map the island. These bombs the military dropped happen to wake up some monsters that live underground, setting up the monster fights we'd be seeing later in the movie. This clearly pisses off Kong, and he completely decimates these military helicopters that are shooting him, showing that this Kong is not going to be taken down by some flying vehicles. The original Kong was on top of the Empire State Building by the end of the movie. This Kong is the size of a building. He kinda needs to be if he's facing off against Godzilla later. And the movie even mentions that he's young, so he's still growing even larger. In the Peter Jackson remake, Kong was a more traditional, realistic gorilla that walked with his fist on the ground, just larger. This one stands upright, showing that he isn't a regular gorilla, he's something more. I loved how he was represented too. Kong has never been a villain. He swats away helicopters and steps on soldiers without hesitation. But he is shown to be a protector. He keeps the people that live on the island safe. And in one part of the movie, he even helps this giant ox that's trapped under a helicopter. He kind of lifts the helicopter off of it and it just walks away. The movie was just action-packed from beginning to end, and some of the characters were extremely entertaining aside from Kong himself. Most notably, Samuel L. Jackson, who plays the leader of the military unit, and he's just playing himself like he does in every movie. With such memorable quotes such as, "Bitch please," he was delightful to see every second he was on screen. And comes close to the idea of a villain in this movie. He becomes obsessed with destroying Kong for killing his men when they first got to the island, and wants to prove that man is king, while everyone else is trying to convince him that Kong is just protecting his home. But like any good villain, he doesn't care. John C. Reilly was the comic relief of this movie, and I thought he would feel out of place, but I found myself chuckling every time he opened his mouth. His character shows that this movie doesn't try to take itself too seriously.
I call them skull crawlers. Why? Never said that name out loud before. It sounds stupid now that I say. Just, you call them whatever you want.
He plays a World War II pilot that crash landed on Skull Island, and he's been stuck there ever since, so he knows the island like the back of his hand, and he befriended the natives there years ago. I did feel like some of the other characters were overcast a bit though. You've got Brie Larson playing a photographer, and Tom Hiddleston playing a tracker. These are really good actors, and the way their characters were written didn't really take advantage of their acting abilities, so you don't really grow to care too much about the human characters in this movie. But you have to remember one thing. This movie is about the spectacle. It's about the giant monsters living on the island. And I always try to pay attention to how different scenes are shot in movies. And Skull Island had some shots that made me think, oh, that looks cool. Like the shots of Kong standing with the sun behind him. And I know that I usually complain when movies use too much CG, when it's unnecessary. All the monsters in this movie are CG. But in this case, they're so massive and the CG looks so good that it didn't really bother me. It didn't take me out of the movie like some other movies do. It looks great. Now let's talk about that after credits scene. Audiences that aren't too familiar with the Godzilla universe might not have understood why it was so exciting. Monarch discovers that Kong isn't the only monster in the world. And it shows these photographs of these old cave paintings that show a Godzilla-like monster fighting other monsters. And these other monsters resemble a moth, a three-headed dragon, and a pterodactyl. These are the classic Godzilla monsters: Mothra, King Ghidorah, and Rodan. As a Godzilla fan, I was quivering in my seat from excitement. Kong Skull Island is a fun monster movie, and is exactly what it set out to be. A fun popcorn flick that sets up a bigger universe full of huge monsters. Leave me your thoughts down below in a comment. I always love to hear from you guys. And who do you think would win in an all-out brawl between the King of Skull Island and the King of the Monsters? Remember to like, subscribe, sign up for notifications, and check out my social media links. This is Fabian. I love you guys, and I will see you next time.